Good morning. This is Morning Thoughts with Teresa Beam because I think best in the morning. Since I have been both, I often ponder how to explain to Protestants how Catholics perceive things and vice versa. While there are differences in theology for certain, there are also things that are the same or very similar. The two groups see the exact same theological facts. They just interpret them differently. They see through different worldviews. One really basic difference is how we believe God makes a covenant with man. Both Catholics and Protestants use the word covenant, but they place different structures in its meaning and ways of thinking about the covenant agreement. I will be putting Protestants all in one bag here because I don't have the time to explore all the different theological nuances in Protestant denominations. So forgive me for generalizing, but I think for the main Protestant groupings, this explanation will work. Okay, number one, Catholics understand God's new covenant with man similar to the covenants God made with the people in the Old Testament. It's not a covenant contract made with equals, but between unequals, God and man. Number two, it is a freely given contract. It's never forced. Number three, because it is an eternal covenant, you enter it only once, one baptism. Number four, for a Catholic, it is a family covenant, a flesh and bones covenant, like a marriage where two people no longer are two but become one flesh. Like family, it's permanent and indissoluble, like the DNA and blood of a family bond. This is where the Catholics are different from Protestants. If they no longer agree with their pastor, or he does something despicable and is kicked out of the leadership position, Protestants are free to move on to another congregation or fire the pastor. In a family covenant, your priest is your father in the same way God gave us biological fathers. So God gives you a spiritual father through the Eucharist, and this bond is also permanent for the church as a whole. You can't just get rid of him. He's family and is dealt with as a family member who's done something wrong. While you can't ignore your family, there's still family, and there's nothing the law can do to change a blood DNA connection. Catholics can leave the covenant, just as a family member can run away from families, but they cannot change their DNA. In the exact way, Catholics who reject God and choose to go to hell will still be Catholic. You covenant for your children through baptizing them. And number five, children born into this covenant are still free, but they are free to leave the covenant. But the most important is number six. This is a huge difference in understanding between Protestants and Catholics. For Catholics, Christ is the new covenant. First and foremost, the covenant is the person of Christ. When we become Catholic through the new covenant, Christ literally is the covenant between man and God in his church. When we eat his flesh and drink his blood in the Eucharist, we are making Christ the new covenant. And through his body and blood, we are one with the Father. This covenant cannot happen without the church. If the Eucharist communion service, Christ's body and blood, is where we become literally, not symbolically, but literally united with Christ, then the church is necessary and vital. Now we will look at these same points of the covenant relationship from the Protestant's perspective. For number one, we are the same. The covenant relationship between God and man is, of course, an unequal covenant. Although I have met many Christians who believe God and man are on equal terms, whether they will admit it or not. Okay, so number two, a contract between free agencies. Now, lots of Protestants believe that there is no free will, and the covenant of God and man is predetermined by God's sovereignty. Some Protestants would agree with Catholics and do believe that man has the free will to enter or leave the covenant. Points 3 and 4. Many Protestants see God's covenant with man as more of a legal social contract, knitting together two people of the same mindset and come together based upon what they believe is truth. This is more like a civil contract, very much like the Mayflower Compact by the Pilgrims. Protestants can switch denominations without scandal, and in many denominations they can be rebaptized. If your pastor or church leader fails in morals or duty, he can be fired because he's legally bound to your congregation by words and is not seen as a father nor part of your family. Number 5, Protestants differ on child baptism, but even if they are baptized, it is a symbolic baptism and does not carry the weight of an eternal covenant with the church who baptized them. And number 6, the most important part is that Protestants do not see God's covenant with them as permanently being through a church as the body of Christ. It is independent of any ecclesiastical body, so that switching churches, partaking of the communion meal, rebaptism, does not break the covenant in their eyes. A Protestant sees God's covenant with man more as a legal contract than Catholics do. For Catholics, it's a joining the family that Christ started. We will probably continue to disagree on these points, but at least we will understand what and how we are disagreeing. This is Morning Thoughts with Teresa Beam. Have a blessed